Gary Burghoff was an absolute delight. He brought that great charm to Radar. The teddy bear, the cuddliness, the naivete.
For 11 seasons, audiences fell in love with Radar Riley, the wide-eyed company clerk who could hear helicopters before anyone else and finish Colonel Blake's sentences before the colonel himself knew what he wanted to say. Gary Burghoff turned a supporting role into one of the most beloved characters in television history, earning an Emmy along the way and becoming, for millions of viewers, the emotional heart of MAS*H. But behind the laughter, the teddy bear, and the warm nostalgia that still surrounds the show today, there was a very different story unfolding on set. One of Burghoff's own co-stars didn't just dislike him. According to accounts that later surfaced, the tension boiled over into open hostility. Today we're going to unpack exactly what happened, why it happened, and why a show remembered for camaraderie was hiding one of the coldest relationships in sitcom history. Let's start with the man everyone thinks they know. Gary Burghoff wasn't a newcomer when MAS*H began in 1972. He had actually played Radar before, in Robert Altman's 1970 film adaptation of the same name, making him the only actor to carry a role from the movie directly into the television series. That continuity gave him a certain authority on set. He understood Radar better than anyone else involved in the production, because in a very real sense, he had invented the character's screen presence years before the show even had a pilot script. For a young ensemble still finding its footing, Burghoff had a head start that the rest of the cast simply didn't share. That head start, however, came with a cost. Being first doesn't always translate into being embraced. As the series grew and the ensemble expanded, Burghoff found himself in a strange position. He wasn't the lead. Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce was clearly positioned as the show's central figure, both narratively and in terms of billing. Yet Radar was arguably just as essential to the emotional texture of the series. He was the innocent in a world of chaos, the boy who hadn't yet been hardened by war, and much of the show's poignancy depended on that contrast. Burghoff seemed to understand exactly how valuable his contribution was. According to people who worked alongside him, that awareness didn't always translate into humility. It translated, instead, into frustration when he felt his importance wasn't being recognized in the way he believed it should be. This is where things start to get complicated, because MAS*H was never a normal workplace. It was a program balancing broad comedy with unflinching commentary on war, filmed on a tight schedule, under constant network pressure, with a rotating cast of writers trying to satisfy a dozen strong personalities at once. Add in the physical demands of filming outdoors on the Malibu ranch set, the long hours, and the emotional weight of scripts that dealt with death and trauma on a weekly basis, and you have a recipe for friction even among people who genuinely liked each other. Burghoff's frustrations didn't exist in a vacuum. They existed inside a pressure cooker that tested everyone. But not every relationship on that set cracked the same way. Some cast members clashed and moved on. Others, according to later biographical accounts, developed something closer to genuine animosity. The most detailed portrait of this dynamic comes from Raymond Straight's 1983 biography of Alan Alda, which pulled back the curtain on several relationships that the show's cheerful publicity machine had kept hidden from the public for years. In that book, Wayne Rudges, who played the sardonic surgeon trapper John McIntyre for the first 3 seasons, is described as someone whose patience with Burghoff wore thin in a very public and very physical way. During one heated moment on set, tensions reportedly escalated to the point where Rudges lost his temper entirely, throwing a chair in Burghoff's direction. It's the kind of detail that sounds almost unbelievable set against the show's warm, wisecracking tone, but it speaks to just how raw nerves could get behind the cameras. Rudges, notably, was never bound to the show by a standard contract. That detail matters more than it might seem at first glance. Because he had the freedom to walk away from the series at any point, he arguably had less incentive to smooth over disagreements for the sake of long-term job security. His eventual departure after season 3 has often been framed around creative disputes with the network, but the discomfort of working alongside a colleague he didn't get along with may well have factored into how easily he was willing to leave a hit show behind. McLean Stevenson offers a different, more measured perspective on Burghoff, and it's worth sitting with because it complicates the idea of a simple villain and victim story. Stevenson, who played the folksy, often exasperated Colonel Henry Blake, described his relationship with Burghoff as love-hate. That phrase alone tells you this wasn't a one-sided grudge or a case of a difficult actor being universally despised. Stevenson was candid enough to admit that the friction went both directions, acknowledging that he himself could be difficult for Burghoff just as easily as Burghoff could be difficult for him. It's a rare moment of self-awareness from a cast member reflecting on set dynamics, and it suggests that whatever was happening behind the scenes wasn't as simple as one bad actor poisoning an otherwise harmonious cast. It was two strong personalities rubbing against each other in an environment that gave them very little room to decompress.
Still, if there's one relationship that seems to have run deepest and coldest, it's the one between Burghoff and Alan Alda. On paper, this is the pairing that should have worked best. Alda was, by every account, the collaborative center of the show, an actor who went on to write and direct dozens of episodes. Someone who understood the delicate balance the series needed between comedy and tragedy better than almost anyone else in the cast. He wasn't simply performing a role. He was actively shaping the direction of the entire production, eventually becoming the only person in television history to win Emmys for acting, writing, and directing on the same series. That kind of influence naturally made him the de facto leader of the ensemble, whether the title was official or not. For Burghoff, that dynamic appears to have cut in the wrong direction. Reports from the period suggest he felt overlooked, both in terms of the credit he received and the creative input he was given, especially as Alda's behind-the-scenes role expanded season after season. Radar may have been essential to the emotional rhythm of the show, but Burghoff wasn't writing episodes or directing them. He wasn't shaping story arcs the way Alda increasingly was. If you were the actor who originated the role, who arguably understood the character on a more intimate level than anyone else involved, and you watched someone else accumulate influence over the show's direction while your own voice stayed largely confined to the script pages handed to you, it's not hard to imagine resentment building slowly over time. That resentment, according to accounts from the era, didn't stay quiet. It reportedly surfaced in sharp exchanges and cold, dismissive behavior toward Alda and other members of the cast. This wasn't framed as an occasional disagreement over a line reading or a scheduling conflict. It was described as a genuine simmering tension that occasionally broke through the professional surface everyone on set worked hard to maintain for the cameras and for the crew. And that's really the core of what makes this story compelling. Ms*H spent 11 years building a reputation as television's great ensemble triumph, a show where actors supposedly understood the material so deeply that their chemistry translated naturally onto the screen. The reality, at least according to these accounts, was messier. The show's biggest strength, its blend of comedy and raw human drama, was being produced by people who weren't always managing their own human drama particularly well. There's something almost fitting about that irony. Ms*H never pretended that its characters were perfect or that war brought out the best in everyone all the time. Hawkeye was flawed. Frank Burns was insufferable by design. Even Radar, for all his innocence, had moments of stubbornness and pettiness. The show worked precisely because it refused to sanitize the people at its center. Maybe it shouldn't be surprising, then, that the actors bringing those characters to life were equally human, equally capable of holding grudges, losing tempers, and struggling to reconcile their own sense of worth with the roles they'd been given. None of this diminishes what Burghoff, Alda, Rogers, and Stevenson accomplished together. The show they built remains a touchstone of American television, one that managed to make audiences laugh and weep within the same half hour, sometimes within the same scene. Its finale still holds the record as the most watched episode in American television history, a fact that speaks to just how deeply the show resonated despite, or perhaps partly because of, the tension simmering underneath it. Whatever friction existed between these men never made it onto the screen in a way audiences could detect. The professionalism that masked their disagreements was, in its own way, a testament to their skill as performers. But it does complicate the nostalgic image many fans hold of the Ms*H set as one big happy family working through the war together. The truth, as it often is with long-running productions under constant pressure, was more layered. Burghoff brought Radar to life with a tenderness that audiences never stopped responding to, but off-camera, that same intensity of feeling seems to have curdled into frustration, isolation, and eventually resentment toward the people he worked alongside for over a decade. Wayne Rogers' chair-throwing outburst, Stevenson's honest admission of a love-hate dynamic, and Alda's more prolonged and complicated tension with Burghoff all paint a picture of a cast that succeeded brilliantly on screen while struggling, at times, to succeed with each other off it. Maybe that's the real lesson hiding behind this story. Great television doesn't require its cast to genuinely love one another. It requires them to channel whatever they're feeling, good or bad, into performances honest enough to make audiences believe in the world they're building. By that measure, MAS*H succeeded beyond almost anything else on television before or since, even if the piece on set was far more fragile than anyone watching at home could have guessed. That's the story behind one of television's most surprising behind-the-scenes rivalries. If you enjoyed this look at what was really happening off-camera during MAS*H's 11-year run, let us know your thoughts, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the hidden history of the shows you grew up loving.